Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in this edition of LinkedIn Live. I'm your host, Suresh GP from TaUB Solutions. And every 2 weeks, we present a topic that is of interest to our audience. And today, we have an extremely important topic that we want to discuss. So I wanted to kind of bring today the agenda for today's session and what we are going to cover as part of this LinkedIn Live. Um, the topic is incident response for DevSecOps. The focus today would be on why incident response, understanding the threat ecosystem, incident response process, technology and threat intelligence, and how do you automate incident response. So it's going to be a jam-packed session for the next hour or so. So if you're dialing in, please put your comments around where are you dialing from and post your questions so that we can ask to our guest today. So before I start, I want to introduce a guest, Priyabrata Mohanty, who is the founder and director at IntelliRoot. Mohanty actually has over 18 years of diverse industry experience with a fervent interest in offensive and defensive cybersecurity and open source. He has spearheaded the IntelliRoot to fortify business and streamline cybersecurity programs. So IntelliRoot, which is his company, is dedicated to shaping a safer and more promising future through cutting-edge solutions to safeguard businesses and enable them to thrive in the digital realm. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce our guest for today, who is none other than Mohanty. Thanks, Mohanty, for joining us. I hope you're doing well. We are in same in Bangalore, but in two different places. I hope it's good to see again people from Bangalore coming in and sharing the dais as part of LinkedIn Live.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Suresh, and thanks for the nice introduction. And
Excellent.
thanks for inviting me to this platform as well, so that it's always a knowledge sharing session. You know, so
Sure.
thanks for this wonderful platform, and thank you, audience. A pleasant evening and a good morning to all of you wherever you are part of the world. So we can start. I think
Yeah. So
Suresh has given us a yeah.
before I get started, I think what I wanted was when we were having a discussion a few weeks before, you had suggested this topic on incident response for DevSecOps. So, any real reason? What was your driver? Because you have a lot of conversations with your clients and stuff. So, how relevant is this topic for today for our audience? And why did you pick, or why were you passionate about this topic called incident response for DevSecOps?
Once you asked me what topic to choose, I was actually going through the global threat reports, trend reports by CloudStrike. Right? It's a 2024 version of that report. And one of the key areas, where the focus for them was, I mean, if you see, there is 110% rise in cloud conscious cases where threat actors predominantly are focusing as cloud as an infrastructure because they know this is where they can get the returns out of their investment, right? And that is why I thought if that report suggests similar things, we should have a topic that actually talks how to set up a program. We already have we have experience with setting up DevSecOps, but how can we have that whole program and create a visibility where such kind of threat actors, what we have been, which are found in the report, and how can we tackle them? How can we identify and protect our infrastructure and our information systems against this threat actors? So that's why
Yeah.
a lot of my focus on this topic is also to understand those threat actors, because hardly anybody speaks. What do they do? What is a dark web, and what are these guys doing there? So I think I thought the audience will also experience that part, because we are seeing one part where we are good guys trying to manage the whole ecosystem to safeguard our assets and do a lot of business functions, run them on the cloud. But what happens and why threat actors are targeting, and that is what we'll explore in this particular session.
Awesome. I think that's a great tone or a context for us to do it. So bring it on, Mohanty.
Perfect. So I think we had a small discussion on the agenda. So we will be covering that, why incident response. I mean, we'll start with a small story of an incident, then we'll flow down to what could have been done, how it happened, who did it, and how we could have tackled it, right? And at the end, why this whole thing of spending so much effort on putting up an incident response program, which we'll slowly explore as we go into the slides.
Sure.
So my first slide is basically a story about an incident which had happened. It's just a true incident that happened in 2021. So basically, this incident is linked to a LinkedIn data breach. Where it caused, it led to almost 7 million accounts of LinkedIn getting hacked. This figure of hack which we are talking about, it actually approximately 90% of LinkedIn's total user base during that time, right? And this massive attack was reportedly facilitated through a misuse of a LinkedIn API. One of the cloud servers or the applications had one vulnerability in the API, and somebody could basically compromise that, and then he was able to access those huge details of the account. And the hacker is known as a Tom Liner. So he was a hacker. How they found it is one of the dark web forums. He was basically presenting that I have a treasure trove of 700 million LinkedIn accounts, and I'm ready to sell it for some $200, which is the funny part of it. So now this is the incident which happened, and now we'll take this as a context, and then we'll go deeper into what would have happened, how this could have happened, and before even we got to understand this hacker, Tom Liner, which I'm talking about, which is a real hacker, right? So
Yeah.
to understand him, we have to dive deep into understanding a bit on how this incident happened. So if you see, basically, as I told you, it was one of a misconfiguration or a vulnerable API that basically was compromised by the attacker, and that led him to some further access, and he could compromise through that API. He was able to dump the complete user base, or maybe he would have extended his initial access from that vulnerable API into further attacks to get that complete details of the 700 million users. So basically, it was, if you consider the anatomy of the attack, is it was a vulnerable API. Let's consider in that context. Now, who did it? Uh, if you see, we threat. Threat is always a threat. It can be any hacker. We always, I mean, that word always pops up. It's a hacker. Because if you see, the hacker word again boils down to, it's a black hat or a gray hat or a white hat hacker, and so multiple we call sects of hacker. So predominantly the hacker ecosystem or a threat, if you see, boils down to basically the purpose of why this particular hacker, or he is basically trying to do certain actions, right? Predominantly, if you see, it is all motivated, major part of it is motivated by financial gain, because at the end of the day, if I'm putting, why am I doing it, I have to gain some stuff. And if you read out the whole ecosystem, major part of the hackers are basically driven by some kind of a financial gain. So we will go deeper into understanding this type of hackers, and then focus on our hacker, basically the Tom guy.
Yeah.
So there are certain hackers who are called brokers. So basically, what they do is they hack into systems, and they basically gain privileged access on those systems, and they act and sell those access as brokers to other malicious or hackers who want to do deeper, penetration. So they are basically they're like a shop of initial access.
Correct.
So you don't have to break into the system. You go and just buy that access, and then you can go further into the infrastructure. Right?
Sure.
Then we have carders, which will not focus, but that's mainly people who compromise credit cards and then try to sell them. Then mainly activists who are politically motivated or social or ideological reasons, they are doing some, right? And then online scammers, basically their purpose is to do phishing and scamming people, and then do some kind of activities to scam them and make some money. Now they are data brokers. Data brokers are basically, now I have hacked into an infrastructure. I have bought the data out in some format like the same LinkedIn hack. Then what I'm trying to do is now I'm trying to sell that home. You know, if somebody, a competitor requires it, or some kind of a, information which will be benefiting to the opposite competitor, I will try to, identify them and then sell that off. And basically now their market is the dark web, which we'll see soon how they
In
basically.
fact, very interesting, Mohanty, that lot of these scraping of the websites and other stuff. So you tell any person you want to get the data, you will be able to get the data, their email address, their phone numbers, and contact numbers. Would that be also called as data brokers? Because I think there's a lot of APIs that kind of skims the pages and give you that information. Because everybody wants that data to process either for lead processing or customer contacts.
Well, not, yes, they can be called sort of data broker, but here what happens is data brokers come out with data which are very sensitive,
Right.
because that is basically utilized for a second stage of an attack. Either it can be a phishing attack, because see, if I just have an email ID or a name, but if I have your PI information, then I can basically convince you more to do a phishing attack, right? I think scrapping will give you one part of it, but
Correct.
if you want to have further data, let's say I want to target something, I can directly have access to a compromised authentication token, and I'm directly copying the complete Google account of that person, and now I am able to identify every possible information about that. So I think data
Absolutely.
access brokers are beyond that, scrapping. They are more of gathering data from multiple compromises, setting it up and tuning it so that then they can sell it, or they are themselves, compromising it. Right.
Sure.
Then we have malware developers who are basically designing the malwares, and this is one critical part, because these are the guys who might require initial access, or they might be using 0 days, which are identified. So they are basically, in the context of cloud, yes, they, I have seen scenarios where they target clouds with bots. What they need to do is they want to utilize the computation power of cloud to do Bitcoin mining. Right.
Ah,
So I think
right.
it's a purpose, right? What
Correct.
everybody has a purpose, how to, gain some financial gain out of it. Now you have cryptors and packers who are mainly writing cryptography part for to obfuscate detection from antivirus vendors. Doxers are again, they publish all PI information, and they also are a little bad in the part they use for blackmailing and all this stuff. So this is, then you have the most famous ransomware gangs, who, I mean, they need no introduction to them, right? And then you have the
No, I think
espionage
that is the
groups. Yes.
highest part, right? If you look at it, Monty, from a overall impact perspective, and with all our communications, we see ransomware attacks to be the most popular and most detrimental in this whole ecosystem. Where you look at the overall scheme of things of how many times we have got into this zone. Do you think ransomware is on the list of the top five threats that you see as the most common way people get inside?
I mean, if you see in last 2 3 years, they're the number one threats.
Correct.
Because there are a few reasons. The ransomware gangs are not operating like a lame hacker. They are an
Mm.
organized crime, and
Mhm.
they are making millions. I would sometimes say the cybercrime drives the cybersecurity world, right? I
Correct,
mean, the
correct,
whole
correct,
industry of cybersecurity driven by cybercrime. I mean,
correct,
you see the ransomware gangs. I think you must have heard in news recently, Conti and some of the big ransomware
correct,
families were targeted, and they have brought them down. But this is basically an ecosystem or enterprise running to make money out of cybercrime.
correct, correct,
So again, espionage groups are pretty much driven by governments and all, targeting, government to government, or creating cyber espionage. So I think this is the ecosystem, and predominantly, if you see, for us, mainly they're brokers or malware developers or ransomware gangs. So these are the guys who are predominantly targeting, so that they can have initial access. In case of LinkedIn, it was maybe a data broker which compromised one of those assets, and then he gathered that information and he was selling for that, right? So
right.
this
So for just for
why.
people who have just joined, please post where are you joining from. Typically, we get people from around the world who come in and join. So we want to know who has been live watching this particular LinkedIn live. And if you want to have any questions for Mohanty as he explains, to do that. One question, Monty, in terms of the process and stuff that we are seeing through, is that the aspect of threats, attacks, vulnerabilities that we are seeing? People think that cloud is secure. Why do you need to think about these attacks? So how do you, like, us, for example, we have the big four, like we have the AWS, we have Azure, we have GCP. So the question is, in terms of it is hosted in their systems, they are protecting it. Is that even relevant, considering that we have a certain bifurcation of where it is hosted in our system, and how do we do it in a public cloud or a private cloud? How much of awareness is there today for people who are leveraging cloud services, that the threats and attacks can be much more than what you think about in on-prem itself?
See, what has happened is uh, the current businesses or technology has explored cloud as just like a plug and play kind of an environment, and the whole industry was in such a situation where we wanted to basically make things quick because we are so rapidly expanding, and cloud was the only way we could expand ourselves. But as every problem, if you see the AI as a problem now, the initial context of security as into the architecture was never there, right?
Right,
And when
right,
cloud providers also came in, it was basically a basic security which comes by default with security groups and basically segregation of infrastructure. But as such, cloud doesn't provide you any kind of security, right? It provides you availability and capacity aspect of it, but
correct,
by default there is nothing called a security, and the security mechanisms which are there are pretty much on a very low level, on network level, where you might not have detection capabilities for threats, even basic threats, right?
correct,
So I think
correct,
what they leave you is, it's all you use the infrastructure, but the security is on your own, is your own hands. How you design it,
correct.
how you build it, you know. So
Exactly.
keeping that, see, I can have a DDoS attack on a Google infrastructure. Yes, they have security mechanisms to protect or divert a DDoS attack. But for an application layer attack, they have no clue. I mean, if you buy a WAF in place as one of their additional services, you might have a visibility on application layer attack. But as such, they don't provide you. You pay and get the service of security, right?
Correct, correct. So WAF is basically web application firewall. If you actually do that, then there is a possibility. Otherwise, your application security is all under your hands. You don't have, the cloud service provider is just going to lift their hands and say that I don't care about it. All I care about is its infrastructure, capacity, and availability.
True. Yeah. So we'll proceed with this. And so basically, you must be thinking, yeah, all these hackers, I have named with multiple categories. Where do you find them? I mean, as we see, the 4% of surface wave where we are now able to access, 96% of internet lies in the deep wave and the dark wave. You know, and each layer as you go down, this is where basically these are the threats who are pretty much active in that particular deep wave and the dark wave. And you will see maximum of these markets or the sites who are selling, they are basically on the dark wave. That's what we say now is a marketplace. You can go and buy anything. If you have a Bitcoin, you can buy anything on a dark web. So the ecosystem, what you saw of threads, is basically actively present. It's like they play cat and mouse game. They come to the surface web, they steal information, take them into a dark web, and then they just start, doing their activities, selling, and each of whatever is, is the thing they want to do. So in order for us to, the main reason why I'm stressing on threats is, if you do not know the threats, if you are putting up a strategy, you are basically now aimlessly trying to do something, right? And it becomes like, it's like you are trying to cook up a solution which is never ending, right? So a threat focused approach also gives you a lot of strategy information to strategize. If I'm in a current environment, current industry, what can be my strategy to protect against threat actors who are predominantly targeting my assets which are in cloud in that specific industry? And that is why it's very important for us to have a parallel with risk strategy, a threat focused strategy, to understand these threats, how they work, so that you will have a proper strategy on a business level, on a global level, how my cloud strategy can be designed to identify and protect against such threats. I mean, that's why, this is the new thing which everybody has to do. Every CISO now has to think that what would my strategy as a if I have a complete cloud setup running my complete show, then we have to think about who are the threats and how they target. You know?
Sure.
So covering that up, see, we understood the threat, and we identified where possibly these guys, have their setups or offices built. So mostly you find them in the dark and the deep waves, and the only way to reach them is over a Tor network. If somebody is curious to know, the only way you can connect into those, in the deep and the dark wave is through Tor. Tor is basically a protocol that connects into a bigger internet structure where you have, a site feature address with codes and all this stuff. You know? So what could have been our strategy? Let's say we are DevSecOps, and we know our DevSecOps pipeline, which you guys can clearly see.
Correct.
So what could have been my strategy? Or let's say I was LinkedIn's guy and I was their DevSecOps guy, and I had to protect that 700 million user accounts which got compromised by X, Y, or maybe some configuration issues. What could have been my strategy? See, one of the key aspects of whatever we are doing in cloud, as we are automating them as DevOps, or we are strategizing to protect those applications in the CI/CD pipeline. One of the key aspects is visibility. See, you do whatever. For an example, assume that in a modern car you are removed of all the senses, right? It's basically like that, right?
Absolutely.
You remove all the sensors from a modern car, and then you don't know where you crash it, right? You don't want you could get it crashed.
Correct.
Similarly, telematics, or what we gain from a car sensors, exactly in any infrastructure, may it be cloud or in-house or a data center infrastructure, your security controls, basically talk to you. They give you certain aspects as logs or sensors giving you some alerts, and that is where, whenever any infrastructure is designed, it is very crucial for to have that visibility gain. And if you see, that's why I pointed the arrow for continuous monitoring and incident response, right? For an example, let's say we have a lot of solutions around cloud security, right? For an example, we have cloud posture management, Kubernetes posture management, cloud infrastructure entitlement management, and even workload protection kind of stuff. But see, all these controls are in place, and they are talking to you, they are alerting you that something is wrong. But how would you do? I mean, you cannot have a DevSecOps continuously sitting all around the clock and doing. That's not the work for DevSecOps.
Correct.
DevSecOps can have an extension of it, where you have an incident response team that takes care, and that too, the incident response team has to have a fair understanding of the native cloud workings, how it works, what are the areas. You cannot have a guy who monitors a firewall, ask him to do a Kubernetes, kind of a security infrastructure model. He cannot do that. He has to understand it, right? And that's the difference which, a DevSecOps team with a incident response capabilities bring to the table, right?
I think that's a
So
very valid point that you're mentioning around. At one end, if you look at it, the DevSecOps, even if you start from the left to right on the value chain, you start looking at your static application security testing, you look at your dynamic application security testing. That's all said. But then, add once it hits the, when the rubber hits the road, when that incident starts coming, there's a separate team which is outside the purview of what this team is doing, and they are not able to resonate with the level of urgency to address it on runtime. So definitely there is a disconnect between the DevSecOps team, which is probably focusing on the pipeline itself, looking at all the different ways of testing strategies. But then when it something breaks, typically with an SIEM, right, security incident and event management kind of solution around what kind of possible vulnerabilities, threats, and stuff, that's becoming a lot more operational in the part. And there's definitely a disconnect that it takes that sweet time to do it. So there's not much of a real synergy that is built around that pipeline, on the
true,
value chain itself.
so moment we think, we have all the capability, like real time, cloud workload protection is there, right? So, but what happens is, even if those things are in place, hackers have ways to circumvent them, because a constant mouse and cat and mouse game, right? And they are trying every possible way to circumvent. So even if you have a EDR in place or a WAF in place, you have cloud protection mechanism in place, there is not a full-proof solution that it will defend against any attack, right? And that's where, even the best of controls fail. So even if you think you have the best of control, still you should have a eagle's eye view of every event happening in your cloud infrastructure. You know, and
So that also
slightest
puts
of
a
events.
sorry, that also puts a pressure, Mohanty. I look at a lot of CISOs who are actually paranoid with all these different attacks that they are now they are not even reporting to the CEO of the organization. They are reporting to the board itself, right? So, do you? I mean, this is just as a curiosity. Do you think that the role of the CISO is more demanding now? Can the kind of conversation that you are happening help the CISOs to get a visibility? You talked about visibility around this chain because everybody does things in their own whim and fancy of doing it. So, what is the plight of CISOs today? What do you think is the current state of chief information security officers, and what are their challenges, and how do you think a company like you or anybody who's thinking about this one have to think about? Because we have to solve their problems. They have a bigger problem to face with the board.
See, one of the key areas is for a CISO role, I always believe is the visibility. You know, see, even if you have 2,000 assets, you have 1,999 assets protected. A single asset is basically the loophole and will lead you down, right? So, for a CISO role, one of the key areas is when you are strategizing anything, it should always be a security by design. It cannot be that you start it off and you say that, okay, I'm done with the business, is done, then I will think of security. From the very early stage of it, security by design has to be incorporated, and
Right.
every cycle of that visibility should be with the CISO. It can be in
Correct.
cloud, any infrastructure, and mainly if you're speaking on cloud, it has to be cloud visibility on every chain of the CI/CD, or if whatever you are developing, that visibility on metrics should be available with the CISO to understand where am I, right? See, there can be challenges, there can be problems, but you got to also know if you have exceptions, how do you tackle it? How do you build the extra layer of security around it? So, and constantly what is happening is cloud environment is so dynamic and the technology stack is changing so rapidly. CISOs are like, they have to have three engines now to basically catch up with this whole thing. And the more we expand, the more we go, and the more exposure we have, the more we have the attack surfaces which are already waiting for us to be, basically taken, or attacked, right? So I think that's where the visibility part is pretty important.
Excellent. Yeah.
So basically, so as we understood, yes, and one of the key areas, if you see, we tell it as a, basically mean time to respond. See, if there is an attack in place and my time respond to is 24 hours, I have already lost my data. If so, the whole context is, if how do we measure that performance? If your mean time to respond is below 5 seconds, that means we have protected our data. If there is an site threat event, we have identified, we have blocked it, and then we have identified and blocked, that means we have protected the information. Because anything beyond 10 minutes, we are losing the first layer of defense, and the
Correct.
attacker has gained hold of some kind of information. I think that's where, when we are building this capability, DevSecOps, when they're extending them into a cloud incident response team, they should understand the incident response process, right? So whenever, preparation is one phase where we are all taking this into account, building the infrastructure, building threat intel, but it starts with basically, identification. So if for identification phase is very important, because that is where you identify the first indicator of a compromise, right? With the event which is there, and that decides your, whether the impact is X or X plus 10, right? If you're not able to identify, that's it, the ball game changes totally, right? And that's where, see, no attacker just can come into infrastructure and say, I can hack it in 2 seconds. It doesn't happen. It happens in movies. The attacker would have done a proper homework as a reconnaissance to know your infrastructure, identify your
Right.
weaknesses, and it will target. And that is the
Correct.
moment when you start doing, you basically record those events which are happening. You know, I have been possibly getting scanned by a particular IP, which
Correct.
which has a different motive, and that's where the whole incident response process kicks in. And
In fact, I
in
think
cloud,
you made it a very good point. One of the things that we had was in one of the instances with our customers, there were sudden spikes in terms of the number of logins at one instance, right? So either
true,
it was kind of failed logins, it was looking at it, it seemed to be something fishy, right? Suddenly you get spikes in attacks, spikes. So we were thinking about this could be an attack, which people are trying to penetrate in terms of getting access control and stuff like that. So one area that we also see, and based on what you're saying, how can I get feedback throughout my life cycle, right? At any touch
true,
point,
true.
whatever is happening, if I don't have immediate feedback that's coming from all different parts like build, test, deploy, post deployment, then I think we are going to miss that. So the part again we talk about is the observability aspect of it, right? Because currently with all your monitoring devices, thresholds and other stuff, it can only do so much. And these are all like predefined thresholds, alerts that you have done. But the hackers are getting even smarter by the day, that your current ways of diagnosing these issues is also need to be much more comprehensive, which means that the ability to get feedbacks at every touch point is going to be very instrumental for us to look at it. Like audit history of that, the number of footprints that we are talking about, the digital footprints that we are seeing, that, and also ability to process the whole data and give us some actionable insights, right? We are trying to still think about, there is so much complexity of it, right?
Yep. With the action, what happens is the response of it as well. So basically,
Correct.
if I'm saying
Correct.
I have a particular problem, I cannot have somebody coming in manually doing that for us. So that's where I have, we had this whole topic of how to automate that response. I mean, that is
Correct.
one of the critical areas where you can reduce that mean time because to respond, because until unless you respond, you have not blocked or done any action for that event. And
Correct.
though the correlation can trigger an event saying yes, this is something malicious happening, but how do you respond? And that's where these cloud environments are pretty much different from traditional what we do in data centers or kind of environment. You cannot have a EDR running because it's so dynamic. EDR will not have any detection mechanism working in those cloud native environments, right? So I think the strategy has to change again, but the incident response process is the same. If you strategize with the people who have that knowledge, the process becomes the same. I think we can proceed with this. So NIST and SANS have the incident response process that basically involves identification, containment, eradication, and basically recovery and all this means, right? So we'll push it on to the next one. I just wanted to give a reference to MITRE. MITRE is a very complex, basically a framework designed to understand the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and methods used by procedures used by attackers. So when we see a threat actor, every threat actor has a distinct signature of basically targeting. So whenever you are in cloud infrastructure or you're strategizing a security, doing a threat modeling, it's very important for you to understand those TTPs. And if you know these are the threat actors targeting, you should know their TTP patterns so that becomes easier for you to strategize your security solution accordingly and create visibility around it. So typically in an incident response component, if you see, it basically relies on three main parts. One is the people process tech. We know the tech part. You got to have skilled, as I told you, you got to have skilled people who understand the cloud native environment, and they can basically help and react to such environments. So it's not just that you know incident response but you don't know the cloud environment. It doesn't make sense. It's like you are lost in a maze kind of stuff, right?
Correct.
The second part is the process. See, any cybersecurity program without a process is just it's a lame and it doesn't do anything, right? So process and the evolving process with the incident response process specifically designed for cloud environments, that has to becomes a differentiating factor, and that helps you to basically tackle those incidents in a timely manner. And technology again, so we have technology that expands from bringing in a sim kind of a solution and then integrating your basically or security controls in cloud, like your cloud security posture management, Kubernetes posture management, or even the Synapse, cloud native application production platform, which basically integrates everything now. So I think that the need of the hour is the tech which can give you the correlation visibility with skilled people and a process. This whole incident response program can be achieved.
Right.
So one of the key areas I wanted to discuss is threat intel. We understood the threat. As I told you, every threat has certain signature patterns in form of KTPs, but this we call it as IOCs. Basically, when you bring in threat intelligence, you are basically able to understand from that threat intelligence that, let's say, there is an IP which is constantly hitting me, is from a country in Russia, and basically that IP is basically having a history of blacklisted activities, and it is a dangerous IP. So when you have that kind of threat intelligence coming with you and aiding your complete correlation, then it becomes much easier for you to take a decision making. And you know that this is possibly a sign of an indicator of a compromise where that malicious IP is doing, and that can be a file or basically threat intelligence in the form of multiple IOCs like a signature or a file or an IP address or blah blah blah. Whatever basically the threat intelligence provides. Basically, if you see OTX, the Open Threat Intelligence Platform, is one of the main sources of threat intelligence which can be consumed into any kind of platform. They're pretty flexible on the language and the transfer how they do. So any platform who has little bit of integration capabilities can integrate with OTX and bring in the threat intelligence, and that's completely
Right.
free, right?
So this open
Now,
threat intelligence platform, is it like more of an open source which is available for
yeah,
everybody? Is it part
yeah,
that we
yeah.
can
So
leverage? Yeah.
yes, we can. So basically, OTX is managed by Alien Vault. It's a big, security company, and they have two parts to it: Taxi and Staxi. So basically, what Sticks and Taxi. So Sticks is basically a formal way to describe the threat. What is the threat and what it does, and Taxi is basically how you exchange the threat with other mediums. For an example, I have a solution in cloud. I want to bring in that intelligence and then use it in my environment, and that's where the taxi part takes care of that to transfer into a format which can then be used in your environment, right? Now the last slide which I want to talk about is the automation part of it. Now imagine you are having a attack on cloud, right? But a DevSecOps guy is not sitting all around the clock and just monitoring it for you. It's
Correct.
impossible because I have never seen such infrastructure or incident response happening in cloud.
Correct. Correct.
Post segregation or DevOps evolving into DevSecOps, there is nothing called a DevSecOps and incident response, right?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
how can we automate this cloud infrastructure? Actually provides certain threat events. How can we automate? And that's where in basically in the non-cloud context part we use something as a SOAR. But now the SOAR, or basically in the SOAR, is basically security orchestration automated response, right? So that means it identifies and it can be integrated with other components to basically take a responsive action. I have given
Right.
for an example. Let's say one of the application is basically we found that after a file upload compromise, the application has done certain activities like deleting something, and that got triggered by our SIM as a correlation. So
Right.
immediately, let's say we execute a Lambda function and say disable this user account, right? Which was compromised, or we say that take a snapshot of the instance and preserve for forensics, and then maybe all the disk associated with that you can do that, or you build a durable storage and transfer all these files and lock that whole storage. So responsive actions are automated actions which can then, based on a threat event, those can be triggered so that that response action contains that attack and minimizing our impact. And there are a lot of
Correct.
source solutions available in market, and also a lot of these solutions are cloud centric. Now in you go to the cloud marketplaces, you will have n number of sources which are available, like stream I there is something on Streamlane, which is lovely source. I mean, if somebody has a Python knowledge, the Streamlane actually helps you to completely integrate using Python with every possible cloud infrastructure, and based on an event you can trigger it to do any kind of automation action. So if we are not able to have a comprehensive team monitoring, at least we can have the automation ensuring that in case of such events, we are taking action till the human team is basically available to take the further course from there, right? So automation is one of the key factors which I believe in the cloud context that would really help organizations who are strategizing an incident response program in the complex cloud environments. Yes, so that brings it to the end of it, and
Yeah, we'll
we are
take some
open for yes,
questions. No, I think this is
sure.
a great session so far around what it is. So, people who have just joined in, just let us know where you are joined in. Thanks so much, Mohanty, for giving us a little bit of a context right from the problem statement of LinkedIn having the data breach. From there, how does an incident happen? How do you detect it? And also, very interesting for me was the level of that 17 steps that you talked about, right? How do we kind of make the visibility around that incident response that comes way back in the fag end of the life cycle towards what DevSecOps starts to do it? How do we bring in that level of feedback at continuous intervals to do it? I have a few questions that have come in when I just came over that part. Um, you should talk about something like a MITRE, which is an extensive framework. How much is that applicable to DevSecOps? I know it was very complex. It talks about the tools, tactics, and process that people are using it, and it can become much more instrumental. But how much of that can be applicable to a DevSecOps kind of an environment?
Yeah, it's pretty much what happens is, as I told you, uh, I mean, for a CISO as a strategy, see, with a risk-based strategy, you got to have a threat-centric approach to that as well. So, threat-centric approach means you are basically able to identify threats in your environment or in an industry, which are the threats which can basically target you specifically to cloud environment. See, every threat comes with a specialization. Not everybody has the capability to target cloud environment,
Right,
right? So there are
right,
specific groups. I would always, also recommend people who are on this to read the latest CrowdStrike threat report that gives a lovely visibility into how targets from different countries are targeting cloud, which are non-cloud based threats, right? So threat actors come with certain skill, and that's where when a MITRE gives you a reference to that on the tools, tactics, and processes which are used by this threat actors to target cloud infrastructure. So pretty much, if you understand that and you are laying out a strategy to basically defend, then it becomes much easier because you know their tactics and you are applying those tactics techniques to prevent them in your infrastructure.
right. Thanks. So we have got people joining in from different parts. We have Alberto Suji, who's a regular person who comes from Nigeria. So people have just logged in, and you're listening to that powerful session from on incident response for DevSecOps. Do ask your post your questions that I will kind of ask through. The second question would be on the boundary levels, right? So if you look at the what is the boundary for continuous monitoring and incident response in DevSecOps? Because when you showed that, it was a poles apart. So how do you see that boundary establishing between the DevSecOps and the what should be the boundary? How does it actually work in a real world?
So basically, it depends upon the complexity of your infrastructure. How complex, how distributed is your cloud infrastructure, and then based on that, if what kind of information your cloud infrastructure is processing, right? Then because that will have a lot of obligations you have in contractual obligation or maybe statutory obligations, right? And these are all the things that actually define what should be a strategy and what should be my boundary around it, right? Obviously, I don't want to protect something which is of no use for me, right? And that is where you define a boundary, you define conditions which say that, okay, this is my specific environment, which is a broad environment that actually has all my information, and I have my incident response strategy might be to protect this completely so that all my energy and strategy should go into that environment. So it depends upon,
Sure.
basically, the environment what we're trying to protect.
Absolutely. So the other question would be a lot of these people say that we don't have a separate team. Can I have my DevSecOps team also work as incident responders? Because considering you did mention that you have not seen DevSecOps people sitting across around the clock, right, on a command center or a security operations center. So is there really a possibility that DevSecOps team becomes your extended arm of incident responders?
Yep. Let's. It will be injustice to pull them out from what they do. They're very good at doing. So I always believe you got to be good at doing that what you're trying to protect, or So it's incident responder guy should have a cloud knowledge, understanding the cloud native environment, and what kind of threats or vulnerabilities can basically prevail in those environments. Him strategizing it makes much sense than a DevSecOps guy trying to transform into an incident responder. So I think that's where, but it depends upon his how if he's really enthusiastic. Yeah, yeah, I have to spend. I want to do this. There's no boundary to that. But again, incident responders are skilled incident responders who are designed to understand the process, the tech part of that. It's always better to have skilled people rather than DevOps or SecDevOps trying to act into those kind of roles.
Well, I totally agree because I think you have to have a different set of skill set, a focus area around it. You cannot do multitasking. The order of the day is sometimes people think that you need to be a generalist. I think there is still a merit to be a specialist in terms of your key area of focus, key area of expertise to do that. So I totally agree that you need to differentiate, and also from a segregation of responsibilities, right? In terms of how
True.
these two roles are going to play, it's important to deviate and say that, what, let's do one thing well, right? And I think in the order of the day, people seem to be so much carried away by multitasking, right? Multitasking is going to make your system worse, right? Focus on things that really matters the most for the DevSecOps from their core objectives and metrics perspective, so that allow the other respondents to take the charge of that. So absolutely, I agree on that. Now on the SIEM side, Mohanty, that what tools can I use? Isn't CloudWatch, which I get it, sufficient enough to do SIEM? Or should I need to have a separate set of tools? I mean, we are not proclaiming which tool to use, but I'm just telling which whatever is available within my reach. Can that not act as a SIEM approach for beyond? I mean, CloudWatch
Yeah.
is not sufficient. Or how do you see that?
See, every tool can become, if you know how to use it, it can fill up those capacity or the gaps which the other tool might not be providing. But some tools come with a specific capability, and SIEM or security information event management tools, which now they proclaim into XDR kind of environment, who has where you can have a comprehensive view of network system level, every visibility coming in, and you can respond to that through that platform as well. So keeping that in mind, I always believe it's not the technology, it's basically the people and the strategy of the process which drives it. But a relevant technology which supports those capabilities like detection mechanism which can incorporate threat intelligence and then give you those indicators, that becomes a differentiating factor which maybe some cloud native security solutions like CloudWatch might not have, right? And that is where, if your level of requirement is to bring into that level of visibility of threats, intelligence coming in and taking proactive actions, I think a relevant tool makes more sense than just a tool which does some parts of that whole game.
I totally agree because one of the things is also about your risk appetite. So sometimes people happen to, when you're trying to assess your enterprise risk and finding out doing it, what tools do you have? Because you try to build a tool chain and you say that, okay, I'm okay with the existing tool. Then means you have not really understood. I always believe that as a security professional, you're always pessimistic. What else could go wrong? So you're better prepared to handle things. So it's always good to complement what is already happening because you're strengthening your cyber security posture. So I think at every organization, as they start to develop with this whole world, it's about how do you improve your cyber security posture? How do you become much more resilient? How do you become much more predictable, right? And that means it's a continuous cycle, considering the level of threats and attacks that are happening every day. You cannot just be contented with what you have, and sometimes even your controls, right? If you look at ISO 27001 as an example, I might get a tick in the box with all my ISO 27001 compliance, but effectiveness of the controls is $1 million question, right? What is that you're doing that could be, what else are you doing to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the controls? That means that we need to really deep dive into make this more impactful. So I totally agree. It has to complement in how things are
What is
being
the
done.
level of view you are looking for? You want to have a
Correct.
drone's view or a satellite's view, right? So
Correct.
all
Absolutely.
depends on that, and then the depth on which you want to see that is where you strategize and bring the technology in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So one last question on this one was the two-part questions. One is about threat intelligence. I love the concept of the threat intelligence. So what level of threat intelligence should I opt for? Right, as a company, it could be a mid-sized company. It could be a company which is having your own products, software as a service, application development. It could be various different dimensions. So what is the level of threat intelligence should I opt for? Based on the size of the company, based on the level of ecosystem that we have in terms of infrastructure, applications, and the whole API setup, right? How do you think would be a good
It's
practice or a
basically, yeah, yeah. So basically, it depends upon what is that we're trying to protect at the end of the day. It's in an application layer. Imagine I'm getting millions of requests in a second, right? And if I have a threat intelligence built in the system which is filtering IPs based on geographies, and then if they have some blacklisted activities which are done, so obviously my attack surface I'm reducing, right? So it depends. See, it's not just on the application level. If you come one layer above on the network level, and also on multiple layers on wherever your information is getting processed, if you have certain set of mechanisms. For an example, I upload a file, but now a file upload mechanism is able to identify from a hash value if this is a malicious, and it detects this is a malicious backdoor which is being uploaded, right? So multiple levels of the application or the design, security design, what is there, multiple levels. If you bring in threat intelligence, that actually gives you that visibility of possibly indicators of compromise, right? And for organization of any size, it's all depend on what you are trying to protect. What is the sensitivity level of the data I am having, and should I have a strategy to bring in that deeper level of packet, visibility to identify threats, right? And I think that strategy completely depends. And always you don't have to have millions of dollars budget spent to design. As I said, OTX, Open Threat Intelligence, provides a wonderful platform which, if can be integrated, then can give you that visibility. So it all depends upon that scale.
No, I think that's a great insight about this open threat intelligence. A lot of our people do not know about how much you can leverage with already there. I love the part that a lot of companies are looking at how much of capex that I need to do to protect on the DevSecOps journey. Everybody is talking about what is the ROI on this one. So you touched upon a lot of these useful aspects to do that, and how the threat intelligence as a platform can help you to bring in meaningful insights rather than just doing everything on your own to do that. My final question would be, as an organization, you do a lot of consulting advisory services, and TaUB Solutions is very proud to partner with IntelliRoot towards making this a successful collaboration. What do you think is your company's focus areas that you are focusing to make customers life a lot more easier, right? What is the focus areas that you think currently that you see a lot of demand and help needed for organizations worldwide that you can support and build capability?
See, one of the key things I always say is, uh, we already know cloud is a complex environment, right? And at least the security should be simplified.
Correct.
And so basically, in complex infrastructures, your strategy should be simplified in a way that you do not have to have complex controls coming in with hundreds of controls, but their outcome is not basically optimized, because you bring in a control, you might not have expertise, you have expertise, you don't have a control, right? So a proper balance, understanding your risk appetite, where exactly you need to focus your budgets and strategize on, is very important. And that's where we come in to help and guide you what should be a conducive strategy, or a strategy that can be beneficial for you to protect your assets against this kind of threats, and simplify it in a way where people try to put in a complex way. You have to have firewalls, these, you have to have WAF, you have to have configured ADRs on the environment. But does it really required for what you are doing? And that's where we simplify it in a way where it makes more sense for your business, and your strategy can be more sensible to achieve that roadmap for cybersecurity what you want to put, right? And that's where our expertise can come in. to
Absolutely.
support in
So I
those
think
areas.
you nailed it down in terms of, I say this word called KISS, keep it simple, stupid. How do you make sure that um, even if it's an environment which is so complex like cloud, how we can simplify the security measures? I mean, anybody should be able to quickly point out what is going wrong and then take some actions and then make that work. So we have last 5 minutes. I want to open it up for Q&A with other people. If you have any questions, please do post it on the comment section. It's been a great thing, and also provide your feedback of how valuable the session was in terms of incident response for DevSecOps. We touched base on so much different topics with the real life use case scenarios, and it's been I'm really pleased that there's such a lot of meat around the whole thing. I think we could not afford to miss a minute that you talked about in the soul scenarios, and you made this more like a storyline, right? From where you started off, giving the context and looking at how the incidents detected, what are the different sources. So this gives you a lot of food for thought for organizations to think about where is their landscape look like, what are the kind of threats, attacks that they are in, how much are they prepared for such kind of an eventuality that could happen. And you talked about MITRE attack framework, you talked about the threat intelligence platform, you looked at the overall SAM landscape and how the whole boundary between the DevSecOps teams to incident responders can need to act upon it. And it's been a real fascinating part of this doing this. And so, what is the future? What is the future of DevSecOps? Because as Top Solutions, we do consulting, training, coaching on the DevSecOps aspect. And I believe truly that DevSecOps is becoming a much bigger dimension for a lot of organizations. It's like a monster to tame. So, what is your prediction, Mohanty, about the future of DevSecOps and why everybody within the organization, irrespective of a small, mid-size, or large organization, should think about DevSecOps?
So mainly what I believe is, mostly you will see a lot of unified, security platforms. See, we have in cloud, basically what we have done is, as on when we came across problem, we have designed a security mechanism to protect it. We started pushing our workloads through Kubernetes, and we had to have a Kubernetes posture management solution coming in, hey, to protect it. So keeping that in mind, a unified platform like Synapse kind of platform that unifies all this. Like if you have a infrastructure as service protection, you have a Kubernetes platform, but you have a unified platform that is able to present you with all these security capabilities and response capabilities, and that is what is going to simplify, and that would be the need of the tool or the technology which we have to get aligned to in future.
Awesome. I think there's a feedback from our thing, really superb delivery, Mohanty, and kind of need to be done once again, as he seems to be dishing so much in such tight time. So people are having a wealth of experience sharing that is happening from you, and they said that they need some time to soak in probably another session like what we talked about, as like kind of micro learning series that can come up in large numbers. So excellent, Mohanty, and thank you so much for your time today. It's been a
Thank you so
brilliant
much, Suresh.
session so far. And I hope each and every one of you liked the session and, in fact, loved the session. It's been very action packed. And as you said, Top Solutions is partnering with IntelliRoot for a lot of these cybersecurity kind of an engagements. And we wanted to bring in the first flavor of what this team is capable of doing, and also opportunities where we can help you in that particular journey of around DevSecOps, on threat modeling, and so much of journey. Then I'm pretty excited. And what started off as a conversation and HSR layout seem to be taking wings. And I'm sure, Mohanty, that there'll be a lot of work coming around the way to
Absolutely,
see
yeah.
and make an impact. Yeah.
A pleasure being associated with Top Solutions as well, and especially to you as well, Suresh. Thank you so much.
So thanks everyone for your time today. I hope you enjoyed. This will be brought in live, premiered in YouTube in a couple of days. So in case if you missed it, do not worry. It will be available in the same platform that you see on LinkedIn. But please do make sure that you are available on the next thing. The next LinkedIn Live is going to be scheduled on March 6th, which is going to be another cracker of a session. So stay tuned for some of the updates that are going to come over. And if you have any questions, do reach to Mohanty. We have tagged him on the LinkedIn post. So if you have any questions, they will be more than happy to do it. In fact, what I really enjoyed was also they have game-based learning. So if you're looking at creating overall awareness training on cybersecurity, just catch hold of them to get a instance where they will show you about some of the scenarios. You look at phishing, malware, and it's so much fun way of doing it. You know that I'm a big fan of gamification and business simulations, so it's a great opportunity to do that. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I really thank everyone for being here, and we look forward to seeing you all again in the next episode. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.